The moment I realized my wife had been lying to me wasn't when the money disappeared. It was when I opened the drawer next to our bed and saw her phone inside, still connected to Wi-Fi, still fully charged, but she was gone. I remember just standing there, staring at it. My heart was beating faster than it should have. She hadn't answered my calls for 2 days. I told myself she needed space. I told myself she was upset. But people don't leave their phones behind. Not in today's world. Not unless they don't want to be traced. Not unless they're making sure you can't reach them. That was the first time I felt something more profound than confusion. It was fear. Real fear. The kind that doesn't come from noise but from silence. 3 months before that moment, my life was perfect. I had more money than I ever imagined growing up. I wasn't born rich. I built everything myself. Long nights, constant pressure, risks that could have destroyed me. But eventually it worked. My businesses grew. My accounts grew. My name meant something. Banks trusted me. Investors trusted me. People respected me. And then there was her. When I met her, she didn't care about any of that. She didn't ask what I owned. She didn't ask how much I made. She spoke to me like I was just another person. That's what made her different. That's what made me trust her. She made me feel calm. That's rare when your life moves fast. Every day for me was decisions, pressure, and responsibility. But with her, everything slowed down. She listened to me. She understood me. She became the one place where I didn't have to pretend to be strong. We got married 2 years later. It felt like the safest decision I ever made. She moved into my house and slowly it became our home. She changed small things. The furniture. The lighting. The feeling of the place. It stopped feeling like a space I owned and started feeling like a place we lived in together. She never acted entitled and never demanded anything. She was quiet, supportive, present, and that's why I never saw it coming. At some point she started asking questions about my work. Not aggressively, just casually. She said she wanted to understand what I did. She said she wanted to feel closer to my world. It felt normal. She was my wife. I had no reason to hide things from her. So I explained things. Slowly, carefully. How my businesses worked. How money moved. How accounts were structured. Nothing too deep. Just enough to help her understand. She always listened carefully. At the time I thought it was love. Now I realize it was something else. She wasn't just listening. She was learning. And I had no idea that the person sleeping next to me every night was quietly preparing to take everything I had. At first nothing felt wrong. That's what made it so easy to miss. There was no sudden change, no dramatic shift in her behavior. She was still the same person I saw every day. She still smiled the same way. She still asked how my day went. She still sat next to me at night, close enough that I could feel her breathing. Everything looked normal. But something underneath had started to move and I didn't see it. It began with small things. Questions that didn't feel important at the time. She would ask things like, "Do you ever worry about people stealing from you?" Or, "Has anyone ever tried to scam you before?" I remember laughing the first time she asked that. I told her scams only work on people who don't pay attention. I told her I had systems in place. Lawyers, accountants, layers of protection. I told her nobody could touch what I built. She nodded when I said that. She didn't argue. She didn't look disappointed. She just listened. Looking back now, that moment feels different in my memory. At the time, it felt like a normal conversation. Now it feels like she was measuring something. She also became more interested in my routines. She would ask when I usually checked my accounts, when I met with my financial advisors, when certain transfers happened. She never asked everything at once. She spread the questions across weeks, sometimes months. So it never felt like interrogation. It felt like curiosity. And I answered. Not because she forced me to, but because I trusted her. Because she was my wife. There was one night I remember clearly. We were sitting in the living room. The lights were off except for the TV. I was answering emails on my laptop. She was sitting next to me, resting her head on my shoulder. She asked me how I knew if something unusual ever happened in my accounts. I told her I had alerts, notifications, that I would know immediately. She didn't say anything for a few seconds. Then she asked, "Has anything like that ever happened before?" I told her no. She just nodded. At the time, it felt like the end of the conversation. But now, when I replay it in my head, I realize she wasn't just asking random questions. She was building a picture, piece by piece. Around that same time, she started using her phone more. Not in an obvious way. Not in a way that would make someone suspicious immediately. But I noticed she would sometimes step into another room to answer calls. Or she would turn her screen slightly away when messaging. When I asked who she was talking to, she would answer calmly. Friends. Family. Nothing unusual. And I believed her. Because I had no reason not to. Trust makes you blind in ways you don't understand until it's gone. There were also moments where she seemed distant. Not physically. She was still there. Still present. But mentally it felt like she was somewhere else. I would ask her what was wrong and she would smile and say, nothing. And I accepted that answer because I wanted to believe it. That's the dangerous thing about love. You don't question the person. You question yourself instead. I told myself she was just stressed. Or tired. Or thinking about something personal. I never imagined she was thinking about how to take everything from me. The biggest mistake I made wasn't trusting her. It was never imagining that she could betray me. Because when betrayal finally happened, it didn't feel real. It felt impossible. And by the time I understood what was happening, it was already too late. The first real warning sign didn't feel serious when it happened. It felt small. Easy to explain. Easy to ignore. That's why I didn't react the way I should have. It was a typical morning. I woke up around 6:30 like I always did. My routine rarely changed. I checked my phone, answered a few overnight messages, then opened one of my banking apps to review the previous day's activity. I did that almost every morning without thinking. It was automatic. That morning something was different. There was a login notification from the night before, around 2:14 a.m. At first it didn't alarm me. Sometimes the system automatically logs you in again. Sometimes devices reconnect. These things happen. But what caught my attention was the device listed. It wasn't mine. It said the login came from a device I didn't recognize. I sat there on the edge of the bed, staring at the screen, trying to understand it. My first thought was that it had to be an error, some system mistake. I checked the location. It showed the same city. That made it feel less threatening. If it were fraud, I expected it to be somewhere far away. Somewhere obvious. But this was local, which meant it was close. I didn't say anything immediately. I told myself I would monitor it. No money had moved. Nothing was missing. Everything was still there. So I convinced myself it wasn't important. She was still asleep next to me. I remember looking at her for a moment. She looked peaceful. Completely unaware. Her breathing was slow and steady. There was nothing about that moment that suggested danger. Nothing suggested she had anything to do with what I was seeing. So I locked my phone and went on with my day. That was my second mistake. Over the next few days I kept checking more often. Quietly. Without telling anyone. I didn't want to overreact. I didn't want to create a problem that didn't exist. And nothing unusual happened. No transfers. No alerts. Everything remained normal. Until one afternoon. I was at my office when I received a verification code text message. The kind you get when someone tries to log into your account. I hadn't tried to log in. I was in the middle of a meeting when it happened. I remember staring at my phone while someone was talking to me, but I couldn't focus on what they were saying. Someone was trying to access my account. And it wasn't me. I didn't tell anyone in the room. I stayed calm. Finished the meeting. Acted like everything was normal. But inside something had shifted. Something cold had settled in my chest. I checked the account immediately after the meeting ended. Again, nothing had moved. Nothing was missing. It was just an attempt. An attempt that shouldn't have happened. That night I almost told her. We were sitting together, eating dinner. She was talking about something simple, something forgettable. And I remember thinking, should I mention it? Do you think I should tell her someone tried to access my account? But I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to sound paranoid. Perhaps I didn't want to turn nothing into something. Or maybe, deep down, I was afraid of what it would mean if it wasn't nothing. So I stayed quiet. And she stayed quiet too. Looking back now, I wonder if she already knew. She was waiting. If she was watching me, wondering whether I had noticed. Because not long after that, things stopped being small. And that's when everything began to fall apart. The first time money actually disappeared, it wasn't enough to destroy me. It wasn't even sufficient to scare me immediately. It was just enough to make me uncomfortable. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember the day clearly because I was driving when I got the notification. My phone vibrated once. Just once. A transaction alert. I glanced at it quickly, expecting it to be something routine. A business expense. A scheduled payment. Something normal. But it wasn't normal. It was a transfer I didn't recognize. The amount wasn't huge compared to what I had. It was large enough to matter, but small enough that someone might not notice immediately if they weren't paying attention. That's what made it feel intentional. I pulled over immediately. My hands felt cold on the steering wheel. I opened the app and stared at the transaction details. It had already been completed. Not pending. Not processing. Completed. I checked the recipient information. I didn't recognize the account. I remember telling myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe one of my companies made the transfer. Maybe one of my financial managers handled something without informing me yet. It had happened before. Not often, but enough to make it possible. So I called my financial advisor. He answered quickly like he always did. I explained the transaction. He checked while we were on the phone. There was a pause. A long pause. Then he said something that made my stomach drop. He said, "That transfer was authorized from your primary credentials." I didn't speak for a few seconds. I just sat there in silence trying to understand what he meant. I told him that wasn't possible. I hadn't authorized anything. He asked if anyone else had access to my login information. I said no. Because at that moment I truly believed no one did. He told me we needed to secure everything immediately. Change passwords. Enable additional protections. Review recent activity. He stayed calm and professional. But I could hear something underneath his voice. Concern. I ended the call and just sat there in my car. My mind was racing, but at the same time it felt empty. Like I couldn't focus on one clear thought. Someone had accessed my account using my credentials. Not hacking. Not forcing their way in. They logged in like they were me. Which meant one thing. They knew how. When I got home that evening, she was already there, sitting on the couch and watching something on TV. She looked up and smiled when I walked in. I remember staring at her for a second longer than usual. Not because I suspected her, but because I was starting to realize I didn't know what was happening anymore. She asked me how my day was. Her voice sounded normal. Calm. Safe. The same voice I had trusted for years. I told her it was fine. I didn't mention the money. I don't know why I didn't. Maybe I needed time to understand it myself. Maybe I didn't want to believe that something this personal could be happening. Because whoever did this wasn't guessing. They weren't trying random access. They knew exactly where to go. That night, while she slept next to me, I stayed awake longer than usual, staring at the ceiling, listening to every small movement in the room. And for the first time since I met her, I felt something I had never felt before while lying next to my own wife. I felt unsafe. I didn't find it because I was looking for it. I found it by accident. She had left her laptop on the kitchen table that morning. That wasn't unusual. She used it often, mostly for normal things. Shopping, emails, watching videos. I had never had a reason to touch it before. It was hers. I respected that space. But that day it was open. The screen was on. And as I walked past it, something caught my eye. It was a message. I wasn't trying to read it. I didn't even stop at first. But I saw my name. I froze. I stepped closer without thinking. The message wasn't from someone I knew. It wasn't saved under a real name. Just a random number. The conversation above it had multiple messages. Most of them were short. Simple. She doesn't suspect anything. I told you he trusts me. And then the one I couldn't stop staring at. He already gave me access. I felt something heavy drop inside my chest. Not physically. Something deeper than that. Something cold. For a moment, I tried to convince myself it meant something else. Something harmless. But there was no harmless explanation that made sense. My hands felt weak. I didn't touch the laptop. I didn't scroll. I didn't open anything else. I just stood there, staring at those words, feeling like I was standing in someone else's life. Because in that moment, a thought entered my mind that I didn't want to accept. What if this wasn't random? What if it was her? I heard movement from the bedroom. Her footsteps. Getting closer. I stepped away from the table immediately and walked toward the living room, pretending nothing had happened. She walked in seconds later, looking normal. Calm. The same person I had spent years trusting. She smiled at me and asked if I had slept well. And for the first time since I met her, I looked at her and saw a stranger. After that morning, everything changed. Not on the outside but inside me. I stopped seeing her the same way. Every word she said, every movement, every expression. I started questioning all of it. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. I needed to be sure. I needed to know how deep it went. So I pretended everything was normal. That same evening we sat together like we always did. She leaned against me, scrolling through her phone, relaxed. Comfortable. Like nothing in the world was wrong. I watched her quietly, careful not to make it obvious. Then I decided to test something. I told her casually that one of my accounts had a security issue. I kept my voice calm. Controlled. I said the bank noticed suspicious activity and locked some features temporarily. I felt her body react. It was small, but I noticed it. She froze for just a second. Then she asked, "What kind of suspicious activity?" Her tone sounded normal, but there was something underneath it. Something tense. I shrugged and said I didn't know yet. That they were still investigating. She didn't say anything after that. She just nodded slowly and looked back at her phone. But she wasn't scrolling anymore. She was just holding it. That silence told me more than any words could. Over the next few days, I watched more carefully. I noticed she started using her phone even more than before. She took it everywhere. Even to the bathroom. Even for a few seconds. She never left it alone anymore. Before, she used to leave it on the table. On the bed. Anywhere. Not anymore. One night, I woke up around 2 a.m. She wasn't next to me. The bed was empty. I stayed still and listened. I saw a faint light coming from under the bedroom door. She was in the hallway. I got up quietly and walked closer, my heart beating harder with every step. I didn't want the floor to make noise. I didn't want her to know I was awake. I could hear her whispering. I couldn't hear the exact words. Just her voice. "Oh, careful." Then she said something clearly. "Yes, he doesn't know." I stopped breathing. I stood there in the dark, completely still, feeling like the ground under my life had already started collapsing, and I was the only one who didn't know how far the fall would go. In that moment, I understood something I didn't want to believe. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't random. This was planned. And the person I trusted most was standing in the hallway, talking to someone about me like I was nothing more than a target. I didn't it because I was looking for it. I found it by accident. She had left her laptop on the kitchen table that morning. That wasn't unusual. She used it often, mostly for normal things. Shopping, emails, watching videos. I had never had a reason to touch it before. It was hers. I respected that space. But that day it was open. The screen was on. And as I walked past it, something caught my eye. It was a message. I wasn't trying to read it. I didn't even stop at first. But I saw my name. I froze. I stepped closer without thinking. The message wasn't from someone I knew. It wasn't saved under a real name. Just a random number. The conversation above it had multiple messages. Most of them were short. Simple. "She doesn't suspect anything. I told you he trusts me." And then the one I couldn't stop staring at. "He already gave me access." I felt something heavy drop inside my chest. Not physically. Something deeper than that. Something cold. For a moment, I tried to convince myself it meant something else. Something harmless. But there was no harmless explanation that made sense. My hands felt weak. I didn't touch the laptop. I didn't scroll. I didn't open anything else. I just stood there, staring at those words, feeling like I was standing in someone else's life. Because in that moment, a thought entered my mind that I didn't want to accept. What if this wasn't random? What if it was her? I heard movement from the bedroom. Her footsteps. Getting closer. I stepped away from the table immediately and walked toward the living room, pretending nothing had happened. She walked in seconds later, looking normal. Calm. The same person I had spent years trusting. She smiled at me and asked if I had slept well. And for the first time since I met her, I looked at her and saw a stranger. The next morning, I went straight to my office. I couldn't wait any longer. I needed numbers. I needed proof. I opened my accounts, checking everything with careful eyes, logging into every platform I had access to. My stomach twisted with every click. And then I saw it. It was worse than I imagined. Hundreds of thousands, then millions, gone. Just like that. Not missing in tiny increments over months. Gone in a few transactions I hadn't authorized. And the accounts she had access to? Clean. Untouched. She left them untouched. But everything else, the money I thought was safe, the transfers I trusted, she had access through her contacts. She had planned it. Step by step. Every transfer executed quietly, perfectly timed. I sank into my chair. My mind couldn't process it all at once. I kept thinking it had to be a mistake. Some kind of error. But the numbers didn't lie. The numbers were brutally clear. Everything I had worked for, all the growth, all the effort, all the sleepless nights, it had vanished. And the worst part? She acted like nothing had changed. That night she came home smiling. She laughed at something on TV. She asked me how my day was. Her tone, her warmth, her closeness, it was all performance. I remember looking at her and seeing the person I loved, the person I trusted completely, and realizing I didn't know her at all. She had been working with them all along, the scammers I had dismissed as just stories I'd heard. She wasn't just involved. She orchestrated it. And I had been blind. 4 hours that night, I sat alone, staring at the ceiling, feeling like I was suffocating in my own home. Every memory I had of our marriage, the laughter, the quiet nights, the dinners, the trips, it all started to feel like part of an elaborate act. She had been smiling at me while quietly dismantling my life, while people I didn't even know were taking everything I had. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think clearly. All I could feel was betrayal, sharp and heavy, settling in my chest. And for the first time in my life, I realized that the person closest to me could be the one most capable of destroying me. I kept replaying every moment in my mind. Every question she asked, every time she stepped away with her phone, every smile and laugh, it all clicked into place like pieces of a puzzle I never wanted to finish. And yet she never slipped. Never left evidence. Never gave herself away. She was perfect at pretending. Too perfect. Too careful. Too patient. That night I made a decision. I couldn't confront her yet. I needed to understand the full extent. I needed to know how deep this went before I acted. Because whatever she was planning, it wasn't small. And if I acted too soon, I would lose everything completely. After that night, I couldn't trust her for a second. Every word she said, every move she made felt like a performance. But I couldn't show it. Not yet. I had to stay calm, act normal, and figure out the full scale of what I was dealing with. I started tracking her quietly. Not in a dramatic way, no cameras, no hacking, nothing illegal, but I paid attention. I watched her patterns. Where she went. When she used her phone. What time she left the house, even for a few minutes. Small details. Nothing she would notice. Within days I started seeing it. The calls, the messages, the people she met with when she said she was shopping or going to a friend's house. They were always brief, careful, coded. She never mentioned names, never explained anything. But I didn't need her to. I could see the pattern. The deeper I looked, the more I realized this wasn't just about money. It was a network. She had contacts. People she worked with. People who knew exactly what to take, how to take it, and how to hide it. She had trained them perfectly, and they were waiting for the right signals. One evening, I found an email she forgot to delete. Just one. I almost didn't open it. But curiosity, fear, and desperation made me click. And that's when I saw it. Names. Account numbers. Transaction instructions. Proof that she had been orchestrating transfers from multiple accounts for months. She had been moving money piece by piece, keeping it under the radar. I sat back in my chair, shaking. I felt sick, angry, betrayed. But more than anything, I felt powerless. I had been living in the illusion that I controlled everything. That my wealth, my life was safe. And she had been quietly dismantling it while I slept, while I worked, while I trusted her completely. That night, I realized the full scale of it. She wasn't just working with scammers. She was leading them. She had planned this for months. She had waited for the perfect moment to act. Every smile, every laugh, every comforting word, it had all been part of the act. And the terrifying part? She never once looked guilty. Never once stumbled. Never gave herself away. She was always one step ahead, and I was finally seeing the truth too late. I knew I had to act carefully. One wrong move, one confrontation too soon, and she could destroy what was left, or vanish with everything permanently. For the first time in my life, I realized something I had never understood before. The person you love the most can also be the person most capable of ending everything you've built. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw her smiling at me in the living room, pretending nothing had changed, while knowing exactly what she was doing. I kept replaying every moment in my head, searching for mistakes, searching for clues I had missed. And that's when I realized, I had to be smarter than her. I had to plan. I started keeping a record of everything I saw. Every message, every unusual call, every disappearance. I copied emails, screenshots, logs. I didn't touch her phone, didn't confront her directly. I just gathered evidence quietly. My heart pounded every time I did it. I felt like I was walking on a wire above a pit that could swallow me whole if I slipped. The days after that, she became more unpredictable. She started asking questions about my work again, but this time it felt pointed, almost testing me. I pretended not to notice. I pretended everything was fine. But inside, I was counting steps, counting seconds, calculating risks. I even started setting small traps. Not obvious ones, but little tests to see if she was still orchestrating transfers. I would move funds around, watch for logins, and see how quickly they were accessed. I couldn't stop the panic rising every time I saw the alerts. But the pattern became undeniable. She was still at it, still working with them, still pretending to be my wife. One night, I overheard a conversation. She was on the phone, whispering too softly for me to catch words, but loud enough for me to know she was giving instructions. The calm, familiar tone I loved was gone. It had been replaced by someone else, a cold, precise voice that gave orders without emotion. I sat there in the dark, barely breathing, knowing she was closer to destroying me completely than I had ever imagined. But for the first time I also felt something else. Not courage exactly. Not yet. But determination. I realized that if I didn't take control now, everything would be gone. Not just money but trust, peace, everything I had built. I began thinking like her. I imagined her moves, the contacts she worked with, the steps she took to cover herself. And I realized I could anticipate her. Slowly. Carefully. I didn't rush. I couldn't. One wrong step and she would disappear with everything. That night I made a plan. Not to confront her immediately. Not to yell or accuse. I would gather proof. I would track every transaction. I would stay calm enough to appear normal, calm enough for her to think she still controlled the situation. And when the time came I would act decisively. For the first time in years I felt the sharp edge of fear mixed with focus. I realized fear could be a weapon if you used it correctly. And I had no intention of letting her win. The day I finally confronted her, everything felt heavier than usual. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every small sound echo. She was in the kitchen making coffee, acting normal. Smiling. Talking. Laughing. Like nothing had ever happened. I walked in slowly, keeping my voice calm. "We need to talk." She looked up, surprise flickering for a moment, but it disappeared quickly. "About what?" she asked, like she hadn't just spent months taking everything from me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. I just laid out the evidence. Every transaction. Every message. Every suspicious call. Everything I had documented. I watched her carefully, studying her reactions. Every micro-expression. Every pause. Every blink. She stayed calm. Too calm. For a second I almost doubted myself. Maybe I had misunderstood. Maybe I had imagined it all. But then she smiled. That same smile she used when she wanted me to trust her. But it wasn't warmth. It was calculation. She admitted it. Not everything at once, but enough. She explained that she had worked with them for months. That she had waited for the perfect timing. That she had always known how to manipulate me, to keep me blind, to let me trust her completely. Hearing her say it out loud made something inside me shatter. Anger, disbelief, grief, it all collided at once. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to disappear. But I didn't. I stayed. I listened. And then I realized something important. I wasn't powerless. I had waited, I had documented, I had learned her patterns. I had proof. I had the knowledge to act carefully, decisively. I looked at her one last time, at the woman I thought I knew, the woman I had trusted above anyone else. And I understood that trust can be destroyed silently, patiently, piece by piece. But betrayal, once revealed, also has a breaking point. I walked out of the room with a calmness I didn't feel inside. I knew the fight wasn't over. The money wasn't fully recovered yet. The damage wasn't undone. But I had clarity. I had control of the next move. And as I left that room I carried a truth I will never forget. The person you love the most can be the one most capable of destroying everything, and surviving it requires cold focus, patience, and the courage to see clearly when everyone else around you is smiling while plotting against you.